All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Elijah Talks Ball. Recording this on Friday night before the Indiana and Ohio State game, BYU and Arizona State, Colorado, Kansas, which sneaky good game. Kansas, we thought that they would be a contender in the Big 12 this year. They really turned the ball over in a lot of the games to start the season. They just could not get their offense rolling, but they've started to heat up. Upset BYU last week. Colorado, they control their destiny. They could win out. Should be a really good game, kind of a sneaky one because Colorado's got the eyes on them now. They have a chance to win out and go to the playoffs with a miraculous turnaround over the past 2 seasons under Deion Sanders' tutelage. And then capping off the night games, we got Notre Dame and Army. That should be exciting. You know, Army's undefeated. Notre Dame fighting for a playoff spot as well. They need to win this to get in. Army, if they go undefeated, you got to think. If you listen to my last video about college football playoff talk, you'd assume they'd get a spot, especially kicking Notre Dame out, add them in. That's what the expanded playoff for, is give some of these smaller schools and programs a chance. And then Oklahoma and Alabama. Oklahoma's not what we thought they were, but still should be an exciting game to see. SEC matchup for the first time between these two teams. So does Alabama, coming off a big win against LSU 2 weeks ago. They whooped Mercer, so they get a little bit of a break. Can they keep the intensity that they've, kind of started rolling with since their bye week? Obviously, they lost to Vanderbilt, which has aged decently. Could not figure it out against Tennessee. Maybe they found their mojo a little bit. So hopefully they kind of keep up that dominant streak that they've been going on. But today's video is about Quinn Ewers and Stenson Bennett. And to elaborate further, is Quinn Ewers Stetson Bennett? Simple, plain, just like that. I was watching TCU versus Georgia and some of the highlights from a couple years ago in the college football playoff, and it got me thinking, Stenson Bennett on that dominant Georgia team led them to 2 national championships, and I was just doing some mental math, thinking, okay, that team was loaded. Well, so is Texas, but Quinn Ewers, we always talk about him like he's the greatest thing since fucking iPhone 5, but I just don't see it when I watch him on TV, and it became very apparent in the Texas and Oklahoma game, coming back from the injury. After watching Arch Manning for a few weeks, we're like, damn, this team is different with Arch. So kind of wanted to dive into it and just do a little comparison, because we hold Quinn Ewers like he is, top 10 pick, at least first round, where Stenson Bennett has had a better career up to this point than Quinn Ewers, way more accomplished with similar talent, and you could argue in tougher games, but he was drafted all the way in the 4th round. So we're going to jump all into it. Like and subscribe before we start. Comment down below what you think, and if you want future player deep dives, this is something that I want to start doing with maybe like a Futures Friday or a Flashback Friday, where talk about players from my past or defenses in general, offenses that kind of get forgotten about. And then maybe a player in the draft coming up that, isn't your Jalen Milroe or your, top Georgia Bulldogs, your Oregon Ducks, kind of guys like Jalen Royals out of Utah State or Nick Nash, San Jose State. Some of these smaller market players that maybe you don't know much about, but it's kind of exciting doing it. So I think I'm going to get addicted to it and probably bust some of these videos out. Hopefully I can figure out a way to add highlights and stats behind me. I'm pretty technologically not even ignorant, just dumb. So bear with just the background and my face and my mouth moving. But I got information to spit, so that should keep you here. All right, so we're going to start with Stenson Bennett and the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm counting his 2 seasons as a full-time starter because he had some time in the 2020 season, but since he took over, we're going to kind of count that reign. because he was kind of getting his feet wet, and we're going to start when they really started to dominate. And there really wasn't much before that anyways. It was like 3 games with just snaps. It wasn't like he started all those games. So 2021 and 2022 Georgia Bulldogs under Stenson Bennett as a starter went 28-1 overall with 2 national championships, an SEC title, which is fucking impressive, okay? And you might think, okay, yeah, well, that team was loaded. And yeah, it was. But you'll see the comps as this moves on. So, those 2 teams combined had 24 players drafted into the NFL. We're just counted players drafted. They probably had some walk-ons, but we're just going with the first 7 rounds of the NFL draft. Easy math, players that you say, okay, these guys were good enough to get drafted by an NFL team. 24 of them. They had 8 first-rounders in those 2 years, with one of them being Trayvon Walker, who went number 1 overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars, which he ended up being the number 1 overall pick. That's set in stone. You can't rewrite history. Looking back, the Jags were the only team out of all 32 teams that would not have taken Aiden Hutchinson, number 1 overall in that spot. And Aiden Hutchinson, as you know, Michigan defensive end, went to the Lions, complete culture changer, has been a dominant defensive end, one of the best in the league since going there. So if they could go back in time, they'd obviously do that. Nobody's quite sure why they did, besides Trent Baalke and all the people that, glaze him into taking the talented guy over the fucking surefire future all-pro defensive end. So 8 first-rounders, 24 players drafted total. The stats for Stenson Bennett, and this is where we're going to get into direct comps moving on from team. In 29 starts, he had a 66% completion percentage, 6,990 yards, 56 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, as well as being kind of a sneaky dual threat with 464 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns in 29 starts. Pretty good numbers, I thought watching him in those playoffs was a little shocked that he fell all the way to the 4th round, which I get it. He doesn't have a rocket arm. He's a little smaller in size, but he put up good numbers against tough teams, because moving on to the next category, he played 11 total games against ranked opponents that finished the season ranked. We're not counting if you played Tulane in the first 2 weeks and they were ranked 13th overall, but then they lost 4 games throughout the season. They didn't finish ranked. No, we're counting teams that finished the season ranked, so they were, for a fact, legit teams that played good seasons, so they were obviously tough opponents. 11 total games in those 2 years. 10-1 was his record, with 31 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, and 7 rush TDs. But this is where it gets even better. In the 4 playoff games that he played, I think it was, Michigan and Alabama, and then Ohio State, TCU. Those were the 4 playoff games he had. The only loss they have, by the way, is the SEC title game against Alabama, which, the first year, it was Michigan and Alabama, Ohio State, then TCU. Not sure if I just said that and reiterated it. Either way, they lost to Alabama in the SEC title game, then later that year, beat them in the national championship game. 12 touchdowns, only 1 interception in those 4 games, with another 3 rushing TDs, and he was lights out in that TCU game. Pulled in, not even halfway through the 3rd quarter in a national championship game, not because he got injured, because you were dominating them, and that's what we all thought. TCU, wonderful story, clearly outmatched, but he balled out in big-time games. You don't go 10-1, even if you got a stacked team. You're playing against Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky was ranked at the time. Obviously, Ohio State. We just mentioned TCU, Michigan. I mean, these teams were loaded, and they went 10-1, and he was a huge reason for that. You could tell by watching him. If you if you don't believe me, just go back and watch these games and watch the command that he had over that offense. Yeah, he had great weapons like Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers and George Pickens, but he was surgical on that field. And I remember watching it thinking, this guy not getting a lot of recognition for a higher draft pick, but he looks like he's poised in the pocket. He almost had that Dak Prescott rookie year feel to him where you're like, damn, yeah, maybe he's not the most physically gifted guy, but seems like he can command an NFL offense at the least. And we saw a little bit of that in the preseason after he got drafted by the Rams in the fourth round, 128th overall too, which is just wild. He looked pretty good in the preseason. And then he had some mental health issues, and he's back on the team this year. But as a backup, obviously Matthew Stafford. Nobody's arguing how great he is. But yeah, 2 national championships, 1 SEC title. Now this is where they really start to separate themselves. Stenson Bennett was only a 3-star prospect at 6 foot, 185 pounds. The only FBS offer that he got was from Middle Tennessee. He didn't get an offer from any of the SEC schools, Big 10, Big 12, nothing. He had to walk on to Georgia at the peak of its powers and earn a spot as a starting quarterback, and did all of that I just mentioned. Put some respect on that man's name. So, I'm not quite sure what made me want to do a deep dive into both of these. Just kind of felt like we talk about Quinn Ewers, like he's so great. Nobody talks about Stenson Bennett, but similar teams, because moving into the Longhorns, and we're going to count last year, and then as far as we got in this year, and Quinn Ewers, keep in mind, has had some durability concerns, so his numbers might be slightly skewed, but then you also got to kind of put an asterisk next to it. Can this guy stay healthy? Because he has shown that he cannot. We're also counting versus ranked opponents, the Alamo Bowl between Texas and Washington the year before last, 2022. Quinn Ewers started it, kind of wanted to add an extra ranked game. It wasn't like people were sitting starters. It was a legit game. Felt like, okay, we could throw that in there since we don't have the full body work this year, kind of help even some numbers out, see how he performs in big situations. So last year, the Texas Longhorns had 11 players drafted in the 2023 NFL Draft. 13 players are expected this year. That's including Ewers. 2 first-rounders last year, being Xavier Worthy and Byron Murphy. They also had Jonathan Brooks, Adonai Mitchell, and Jatavion Sanders go in the second round. Pretty high up as well, so they don't count as first rounders, but they were still high picks, so high talent. It wasn't like they had a bunch of late round guys on their squad. 3 first rounders projected this year. I believe it's Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams, possibly, maybe late first round. Quinn Ewers, didn't count him, but the other one is Isaiah Bond, the speedy wide receiver, transfer from Alabama. So 8 first rounders there. You got 5 for sure first round picks, and people are talking about Ewers like he is a first round pick, so you would add another one. That would be 6 first rounders to the Georgia's 8. So with 24 players drafted in total on both sides, so pretty comparable teams. Keep in mind, Texas was playing in the Big 12 last year. This is their first year in the SEC, so completely different talent pool. I mean, are we going to look at Kansas and Colorado and Oklahoma State have being serious contenders to beat fucking even Arkansas? Probably not. I mean, Texas barely beat Arkansas this year in their first year in the SEC. So, pretty even squad. I don't want to hear you guys saying, oh, Georgia's team was loaded. Texas has been loaded, and this is peak NIL. They have the most money to spend, and they've been loading it up. Quinn Ewers' stats in 20 starts, 68.5% completion percentage, 43 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 5,377 pass yards. Now, I'm not quite sure if you guys knew this, but college counts yards lost on sacks as rushing total. But we know Quinn Ewers not a big rushing threat, but if he gets say 25 yards rushing on the ground. If he gets sacked 4 times for a total loss of 28 yards, his total on the day would be -3 rushing yards. Either way, his negative total rushing yards with a massive offensive line that's probably been the best one over the past 2 years, -20 yards rushing, 6 TDs. Not super great, if you're going to be honest. This is where it gets a little bit fishy. Including the Alamo Bowl against Washington, first ranked opponents that finished ranked, Quinn Ewers has a 3-4 record with 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and 2 rushing touchdowns. 3-4 record. To Stenson Bennett's 10-1 record with 31 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. It's not even fucking close. I guess the mute button just came off my TV. UNLV, San Jose State. Gotta watch the football on Friday nights. Why not? But yeah, not super great. And when you watch him in these big games, like the first half against Washington, the first half against Oklahoma this year, it just doesn't seem like he's ready to come out. Obviously, the first half against Georgia this year, he got benched because it was just too much for him. Doesn't seem like he is a big game player at this point in his career. It could change. Listen, we still have the SEC title game. They have a huge game with Texas A&M coming up later this season, which would decide if they go to the SEC title game, and then obviously the playoff run. So he can rewrite all this shit that I'm saying, but up until this point has not produced in the big games, evident by that 3-4 record. I do also want to throw in, because not like anybody's going to comment on this video because nobody watches them right now. But I know somebody's going to say, well, he played good against Michigan, and Michigan was ranked. Yes, they were ranked, but they were found out to be dog shit because they can't move the ball any better than I could go out there. Me, myself, and I, my 2 dogs, and my girlfriend, we could probably get more yards than this Michigan offense this year. But their defense, I'm including it because they were at Michigan beginning early part of the season. This was a huge, huge game. And that Michigan defense, I mean, they got Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham on the interior of that defensive line. They still got Rod Moore at safety, Will Johnson at corner, Josiah Stewart, their edge rusher. He's been pretty good this year. So still a really, really solid defense that's pretty much still somewhat intact from when Jim Harbaugh brought them the Natty home last year. He went 24 for 36, 3 TDs, 0 interceptions, 246 yards. So I'm not completely trying to shit on Quinn Ewers here. I'm just trying to shed some light on why do we act like this guy is the next fucking Drew Brees or Joe Burrow. He's not. He hasn't played that good. 0 playoff wins, guys. 0 playoff wins. Like I said, could change this year. And he has one Big 12 title. So not a lot of production in big games. A little worrisome, especially we're not talking about, Mississippi State where it's like, yeah, they're not going to get to the playoffs. No, this is Texas. They're one of the biggest brands in the college football landscape right now. This is where the comparison just continues to separate even more. Quinn Ewers was the top prospect in his class. 5 stars, offers from everywhere, 6'3", 206 pounds. Decided to commit to Ohio State, transfer back to Texas a year later. Like I just said, Stetson Bennett had to earn this spot as a walk-on with 1 offer from FCS schools or FBS schools. Quinn Ewers was the top prospect in his class. Quite frankly, when you factor everything in, and Quinn Ewers does have 1 year of eligibility left, he's projected on some sources as a first-round pick. I would definitely not take him in the first round, and I wouldn't even take him in the second round. Maybe if you're the Rams, you ironically, since you have Stenson Bennett, but maybe you take a flyer on him in the third since Stafford's getting older and you give him with Sean McVay because he does have the arm talent. Obviously, you wouldn't be the number 1 overall prospect in your class if you didn't have physical gifts. But if I'm Quinn Ewers, I'm coming back for another year. And you can guarantee that Texas is not going to have him be the starter next year if he decides to come back for his final year of eligibility. He did that this year when people were talking about, is Arch Manning going to transfer to a different school? What we saw out of Arch Manning in the middle part of this year while Quinn Ewers was down, Arch Manning's the real deal. And I really believe in my soul, if Arch Manning was to start the remainder of the season and the playoffs, that Texas has a way better shot to win the national championship and do serious damage in the playoffs. I don't see it with Quinn Ewers. So if he decides to come back for another year, you can believe on everything that he is going to be transferring to, let's see. You got Oklahoma. Garrett Nussmeier from LSU is probably going to come back. Alabama, Jalen Milroe might come back, but he's not going to go there. Maybe Ohio State if Will Howard decides to go into the draft. Maybe Ohio State brings him back. Michigan needs a quarterback. He's going to go to a big school, and he's going to get a bag for it. Even a team like Georgia. Kind of a country kid. Why don't you bring the dude with the mullet in to play on that team? Because if they've had somewhat decent quarterback play, which they haven't, because he has been decent. I'm not acting like he's been, out of 150 quarterbacks, 147th. No, he's been a good quarterback college-wise, but he just hasn't lived up to the standard that we seem to talk about him as, and especially not from a quarterback where we seem to forget was so good in college, and we talk about this guy like he should be the first overall pick in every draft for the rest of the time. So look for him to transfer if he decides to come back, which he should, unless his agent and his team can get him up there. And he has, like I said, if he has a good remainder of his season, this will all be for a moot point. It wouldn't matter because the story has not yet been written fully for this guy. But as of right now, if I'm a GM in the NFL, there's not a way in hell that I'm taking Quinn Ewers in the first round or in the high second round. It's not happening. And if I'm a college that, like Colorado, who just recruited that 5-star Julian Lewis, quarterback out of Georgia, or Michigan, who just snagged Bryce Underwood, or Ohio State, who has Tavian St. Clair, there's not a chance in hell that I'm taking on Quinn Ewers. So where he is going to go, not quite sure. Excited to see the rest of the college football season, guys. If you like this video, let me know in the comments players that you'd like to see me kind of go back in time for. It doesn't need to be a direct comparison like this. It could just be a deep dive. I like doing this. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed it, guys. Enjoy the Saturday football, and of course, enjoy the Sunday football, baby. It's starting to heat up. Games really mean something right now, and I'm here for it. Peace out.